The US and its allies have vowed to move heaven and earth to help Ukraine win its war against Russia. Representatives from 40 countries met at the Ramstein air base in southwestern Germany for US-led talks on bolstering Kyiv's defence capabilities. Germany's Defence Minister Christine Lambrecht pledged to provide Ukraine with 50 anti-aircraft tanks, while her US counterpart Lloyd Austin said that Washington will do everything possible to ensure that Ukraine is well equipped to defeat the Russian invaders.
Now, that visit only underscored my sense of urgency, an urgency that I know that we all share. So I'd like this whole group today to leave with a common and transparent understanding of Ukraine's near-term security requirements, because we're going to keep moving heaven and earth so that we can meet them.
Meanwhile, Moldova has raised its terror threat to the highest level following explosions in the pro-Russian breakaway region of Transnistria. Moldova's President Maia Sandu held emergency security talks amid reports of attacks on a military unit and 2 radio antennae carrying Russian broadcasts. Now, last week, a Russian military commander revealed plans to create a corridor between southern Ukraine to Transnistria. Sandu's accused pro-Russian groups of trying to increase tensions and vowed to maintain peace and stability in Moldova.
This is a complex, tense situation. We are vigilant. We will take all needed measures to prevent any escalation, to strengthen security of the state, to protect our citizens.
Well, to talk through all of this, I'm joined here in the studio by our correspondent, Sasha Vakulina. Sasha, in the past 24 hours in Moldova, in Transnistria, we've seen around 3 attacks. Of course, Ukraine watching on. What is its reading of the strategy at hand here?
Well, Transnistria is breakaway a region at all times since the early 90s. There are around 1,500 and up to 2,000 Russian soldiers there. Moscow calls that permanent peacemaking mission, and they are guarding a stockpile of some 20,000 tons of munition there at the bases there. Now, Moldova and Transnistria are not the target of what's been happening here, but it's important to understand the location of Transnistria and how is it important. At the early stages of the war, when Russia invaded Ukraine, trying to go towards Odessa, Russian forces tried to do so from the south. So when they moved from Crimea and they took over Kherson region, this is when they tried to get to Odessa. But for that, they would have to pass through the region of Mykolaiv, so to say, to encircle Odessa from Mykolaiv region and Transnistria. Well, this did not happen. Mykolaiv is not occupied and the fighting is happening there. In fact, there are counterattacks by Ukrainian forces there at the border between Mykolaiv and Kherson region. Then they tried to do it from the sea, but then we saw with the sinking of the Moscow warship that did not work. Also, when Moscow warship sank, Moscow did not say why, what were the reasons. Ukrainians said that they struck it with 2 missiles. But in fact, what happened is that Russian warships now have to stay a little bit further in the sea. So this way of taking Odessa is not really working either. This is why we are seeing now that there are some forces from Transnistria that could join this fighting. Russian forces could join Russian forces in Ukraine now in the land, trying to move towards Odessa to secure that corridor and that direct access to Transnistria. The other thing is that Moldova, in fact, is a rather small country. It's 2.6 million people, the population of Moldova, and it is not the member of the European Union and NATO. So Moldova said a couple of weeks ago they couldn't even technically join sanctions because the president admitted publicly, saying this would not make sense. It would not make any impact. So Moldova now is in a very, very complicated situation itself.
And meanwhile, as that goes on, we've got a meeting of around 40 defence ministers. They're in Ramstein. We've heard from the US Defence Secretary who's saying essentially the allies would move heaven and earth to support Kyiv. Does Kyiv trust that, I guess? And if Washington and if allies follow through with that kind of weapon support, what could that mean for the fight on the ground?
Well, here the trust issue works both ways, because on one hand we've seen that visit by the US officials to Kyiv with the talks behind the closed doors and the promises now, and then of course Lloyd went to Germany to lead this meeting today. At the same time, The way the US speaks now about helping Ukraine and providing Ukraine with whatever heavy weaponry it needs, this is not something we've been hearing from the beginning of this war. So this is around the trust also in Ukraine's capability of moving and counterattacking and winning the war. Now, Kyiv's statement on this is quite clear. Not only they say they can win that, but they are very open in the list of their demands when it comes to the weaponry. It's not a secret. President Zelensky said that, the defense ministry said that this is a list, and they passed on this list to all the countries. So seeing now some of the members of NATO and some of the allies, particularly Germany, being on board after the negotiating and the meeting with the American allies, this is a huge change in this strategy.
So keep us up to date, bring us up to date with the main flashpoints which we're seeing on the ground right now. And I understand that Zaporizhzhia, for the first time, was actually struck.
The heavy fighting continues on all the front line in the east, from Kharkiv all the way to the south. In fact, that's true. Zaporizhzhia this morning had 2 missile strikes. Now, the case of Zaporizhzhia is slightly different as well. This is a big city. There's around 800,000 people, up to 1 million people. But it is the only city in that part of Ukraine, this is southeast of Ukraine, that has not been attacked and is not being occupied by Russian forces, whilst up to 70% of the wider Zaporizhzhia region are now under Russian military control. When the evacuation corridors happened in the past from Mariupol, whenever evacuating from Mariupol, all those areas that are occupied by Russian forces, all those Ukrainian civilians, they are going to Zaporizhzhia. So this is a rather safer place and the only safer place in this area. The UK Defense Ministry warned that Russian forces will try to attack Zaporizhzhia from the south, but after weeks of preparing and somehow waiting for it, the Ukrainian forces in Zaporizhzhia got ready and prepared. They're defending themselves. So this is when we saw those missile strikes today. They hit the factory in Zaporizhzhia. This is a very industrial area, and there were quite a few air raid sirens today in Zaporizhzhia, and the population and the Ukrainian forces, they are really on high alert on what's coming now, whether Russia would try now to get Zaporizhzhia, if not by land, but then with missiles.